Imagine a wooden box, just 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and about 2.5 feet deep.
Right, which is basically the size of a large dog crate.
Exactly, a
Yeah.
dog crate. Now, I want you to imagine folding your entire body inside that box. You pull your knees all the way up to your chest, you tuck your chin down, and you just sit there and listen to someone actually nail the lid shut over your head.
Oh, it's viscerally terrifying to even think
It
about.
really is. You're plunged into absolute darkness, relying on like a single tiny hole drilled into the wood just to get oxygen. And then you basically pay a corporate shipping company to toss that crate onto a wagon and mail you to a different country.
Yeah, you literally become freight.
Right. And, we spend so much time looking at history from this huge macro perspective, like sweeping institutional changes, giant armies, political movements mapped out from a bird's eye view.
Oh, absolutely. The textbook version of history.
Exactly. But today, for this deep dive, we are shrinking the lens way down to the claustrophobic scale of a single beating heart inside a nailed-shut wooden crate.
I love that framing because the sheer physical reality of those dimensions, it completely strips away any of that abstract academic distance we usually have when we discuss this stuff.
Yeah, it really does.
You're no longer talking about the grand concept of escape, right?
Hmm.
You are looking at the terrifying, suffocating mechanics of one human being just trying to survive inside a literal wooden cage.
Which is why we're dedicating this entire deep dive to the harrowing, intimate, and honestly deeply complicated story of Henry Brown. Because in 1849, this man weaponized the United States postal and freight systems to literally mail himself out of slavery.
It is one of the most unbelievable logistical feats of the era.
It really is wild. And to reconstruct this incredible journey with you today, we're pulling from a really phenomenal stack of sources. We've got historical shipping and logistical accounts from the 1840s, Jeffrey Ruggles' definitive biography, which is called The Unboxing of Henry Brown.
Such a great book, meticulously researched.
Oh, it's incredible. We're also looking at William Still's classic foundational text, The Underground Railroad. And crucially, Henry Brown's own personal narratives, looking at both the versions published in 1849 and 1851.
Right, because our mission today is to dig underneath the mere spectacle of this escape.
Right.
I mean, the logistics of how a man becomes a package are absolutely fascinating, and we're going to get into the really granular details of that.
Oh, for sure. The mechanics are mind-blowing.
But we also really have to explore the immense hollowing grief that drove him into that box in the first place. We're going to examine the controversial fame that followed him for decades afterward, too.
Yeah, life out of the box was not simple for him.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And above all, we really want to look at the brilliant, terrifying subversion of what he actually did. Henry Brown took the absolute cruelest logic of chattel slavery, this legal fiction, that a human being was just property, right? Just a piece of freight to be bought and shipped.
Right.
And he used that exact legal fiction to shatter his own chains.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how someone calculates that being nailed inside a coffin-sized crate is, like, a reasonable risk, we have to understand the environment he was so desperately trying to leave behind.
Absolutely. The context is everything here.
Right. So Henry Brown was born into slavery in Louisa County, Virginia, somewhere around 1815 or 1816, but he doesn't actually spend his life on a rural plantation. As a teenager, he's sent into Richmond, which was this bustling urban center, to work in a tobacco factory.
Yeah, and that distinction is really important.
So what did that daily reality actually look like for him?
Well, industrial slavery in an urban center like Richmond operated under a very different set of mechanisms than the agrarian plantation model we usually picture.
Okay, how so?
Tobacco factories in the 1830s and 1840s were massive, sweltering, incredibly dangerous places. The leaves had to be stemmed, treated, and pressed. The air was just totally thick with tobacco dust.
Oh, it sounds awful.
And the heat was stifling because the tobacco needed to stay pliable. Plus, the labor was intensely physical. And Brown was working under a system known as hiring out.
Right, meaning the person who legally owned him didn't actually run the factory, right? They essentially just rented his labor to a factory boss.
Exactly. The slaveholder leased Brown's physical body to the factory for a set annual fee. The factory owner extracted the labor, and the slaveholder collected the check.
Wow, just entirely transactional.
Totally. However, in this urban industrial system, there was a slight margin of flexibility. Enslaved workers were sometimes given a daily or weekly quota of work.
Okay.
If they managed to exceed that quota, like by working deep into the night, they could occasionally earn a tiny bit of what was called overwork pay for themselves.
So they could actually pocket a little bit of cash.
Yeah, exactly. And over the course of years, Henry Brown actually managed to save a small amount of money this way. But honestly, more importantly, living in Richmond allowed him a sliver of social mobility.
Right, because he joined a church choir, didn't he?
He did. He built a real community. And through that, he met a woman named Nancy, who was enslaved by a different person in the city.
Okay. And they fell in love, right?
They fell in love, they got married, they had 3 children together, and by 1848, Nancy was actually pregnant with their 4th child.
I really want to focus on that marriage for a second because this is where the sheer psychological horror of the institution just really crystallizes for me.
Oh, absolutely.
In my mind, the legal paradox of an enslaved marriage is somewhat like being handed a lease to an apartment. You know, you move your furniture in, you paint the walls, you have kids, you build your whole life in this space.
Right, you make it a home.
Exactly. But the entire time, you know the lease is written in disappearing ink. The person who owns the building can legally just burn it down at any second, and the law will entirely protect the landlord and basically tell you that your home never actually existed.
That is, I mean, that captures the legal mechanism perfectly. Under the laws of Virginia, and really the entire American South, enslaved people had absolutely no legal standing to marry.
Which is just so hard to even fathom.
It is. Their relationships were recognized socially within their own communities, of course, and sometimes they were tolerated or even encouraged by slaveholders for their own financial benefit. But they were contractually void.
So there's absolutely zero protection.
None. A slaveholder could liquidate a human family just as casually as a business might liquidate office furniture. And the psychological toll of that is staggering.
I mean, how do you even live with that?
You're allowed this narrow margin of happiness, but every single day you are forced to live with the ambient terror that your spouse or your kids could simply vanish.
And then in the late summer of 1848, the disappearing ink vanished.
It did. It really did.
The man who owned Nancy just decided to sell her and all of their children to a totally different slaveholder, one who was taking them south to North Carolina.
Yeah, it was a massive, devastating blow.
And Henry Brown was actually working in the factory when he got the news, right? He rushed out into the streets of Richmond, and he was forced to just stand on the side of the road and watch his pregnant wife and his 3 children be marched past him in a chained procession.
Just completely powerless.
Completely. He couldn't fight the guards. He couldn't buy them back. He couldn't do a single thing.
When you read the historical accounts of this moment, the devastation is just absolute. Brown later described Nancy looking at him through her tears as the procession moved away.
God, that is just heartbreaking.
It's horrific. And this isn't just a sad anecdote. You know, this is the engine for the entire deep dive. The narrative of Henry Box Brown is not a daring, swashbuckling adventure story.
Right, it's not some fun heist.
Exactly. It is an act of sheer, unfathomable desperation born of a grief that is just impossible to quantify. He didn't climb into a box to seek a thrill. He got into the box because his world had already been entirely destroyed.
I keep trying to wrap my head around the mental state of someone the day after that happens. You wake up, your family is gone forever, and you're just expected to walk back into that sweltering tobacco factory and keep pressing leaves for the very people who let this happen.
I mean, the trauma of that absolute powerlessness fundamentally alters a person's risk calculus.
Yeah, how could it not?
The institution of slavery utilized the constant threat of violence and death to enforce compliance. But what happens when a system strips away every single reason a person has to actually endure their chains?
You essentially have nothing left to lose.
Right, it hollows out their fear. If the absolute worst thing you can imagine happening to you has already happened, the threat of physical death suddenly loses its leverage.
That makes total sense.
The system inadvertently created a man who was willing to risk absolutely everything simply because he felt he had nothing left.
Because if you've survived the unsurvivable, what is a wooden box, right?
Exactly.
In his narratives, Brown wrote that the plan came to him almost like a religious revelation. Like he was praying for a way out, and the idea of literally having himself shipped as freight to a free state just materialized in his mind.
It was a stroke of desperate genius.
It really was. But deciding to mail yourself is one thing. Actually navigating the logistics of a heavily surveilled city like Richmond, where you are legally forbidden from moving freely, is a totally different nightmare.
Oh, the logistics were incredibly complex.
Right, because he couldn't just walk into a post office with a giant crate. He needed accomplices.
He did. And he brought 2 people into his confidence. The first was James C.A. Smith, who was a free black man who sang with Brown in the church choir.
Okay.
Smith was instrumental in the logistics, but it was incredibly dangerous for him to be involved. Free black people in the South lived under constant surveillance and faced the perpetual threat of being kidnapped and sold right back into slavery.
So even helping was a massive, massive risk for him.
Absolutely. Now, the second accomplice is where the historical record presents a really massive contradiction. It was a white shoemaker named Samuel Smith.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because Samuel Smith wasn't some noble abolitionist, he was a slave owner.
Yep, he legally owned people.
Henry Brown entrusts his life, his literal only chance at freedom, to a man who legally owns other human beings. The desperation of that calculation is just wild.
It sounds completely contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Until you look at the economic reality of Samuel Smith.
Okay, what was his deal?
Well, the historical sources note that Smith was a notorious gambler. He was drowning in debt and completely desperate for cash. He wasn't motivated by a sudden moral awakening regarding the evils of slavery at all.
Ah, so it's about the money.
Entirely. He was motivated by the fact that Henry Brown was offering him a significant portion of his life savings, that overwork money he had accumulated over all those years.
So it's purely a transactional alliance. Brown is basically making a deal with a representative of the exact system he's fleeing, just because the guy owes money to bookies.
That's exactly it. It's exactly the kind of chaotic, messy reality that historical summaries usually leave out.
Right, we want it to be heroes and villains.
Exactly. But you don't always get to choose righteous allies. Sometimes you have to rent the services of a morally bankrupt person who just happens to have the geographical and racial privilege that you lack.
Wow, yeah.
So Samuel Smith took Brown's money and actually traveled north to Philadelphia to set up the receiving end of the shipment. He coordinated with the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, specifically their Vigilance Committee.
Wait, stop right there and explain the Vigilance Committee, because I think a lot of people just assume there was, like, a public office in the North where escaped people could just walk in and sign a guest book or something.
Right, like a tourist center. No, the Vigilance Committee was the covert operational arm of the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia.
Okay, so highly secretive.
Very. It was essentially an organized network of abolitionists, both black and white, who actively defied federal law to harbor, clothe, fund, and protect fugitive slaves. We are talking about major figures here, like James Miller McKim and William Still.
Oh, William Still is fascinating.
He's incredible. Still was a free black man who meticulously interviewed and recorded the stories of hundreds of escaped people. He kept these secret ledgers that would later become his seminal book.
Right, so Samuel Smith meets with these guys.
Yes, he meets with these men, explains this totally audacious plan, and incredibly, they agree to receive the package.
So they have the destination secured, but how do you actually ship a human being in 1849? You know, you don't have FedEx.
No FedEx, no UPS.
Right. So the carrier they chose was the Adams Express Company, and they chose them for a very specific, totally fascinating reason. And it definitely wasn't because Adams Express was some anti-slavery organization.
Not even slightly.
Yeah.
Adams Express was a massive freight and logistics conglomerate. In the 1840s, the American transportation infrastructure was rapidly expanding.
Right, the Industrial Revolution stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Steam trains and steamboats were revolutionizing how quickly goods can move across state lines. And Adams Express basically sold two things: speed and privacy.
Okay, so privacy was the key.
Exactly. If you paid the freight fee, they put your box on a train and they got it to its destination. They did not have security checkpoints. There were no X-ray machines, obviously.
Right, they just moved the boxes.
They operated on the pure assumption that inspecting the cargo would slow down the supply chain and alienate their business clients.
So it's basically capitalism over curiosity.
Spot on.
They trusted his life to the terms of service of a 19th century logistics company because Adams Express didn't care if a box contained boots, books, or a breathing human, just as long as the postage cleared.
Yes, the abolitionists perfectly leveraged the blind eye of commerce, but, establishing the shipping route was only half the battle.
Right, he still has to get in the box.
Well, think about the immediate physical hurdle. Henry Brown still works in a heavily monitored tobacco factory every single day. He can't just call in sick.
Oh, of course.
The system of slavery demanded that the enslaved body be constantly available for labor and constantly visible. An unexcused absence of even a few hours would trigger an immediate manhunt.
Right, they would just assume he ran away.
Exactly. So he needed an ironclad reason to be absent from work on the exact day the box was scheduled to ship.
Which leads to a detail in the source material that is just viscerally horrific to read.
It really is.
To get a single day off work, Henry Brown procured a bottle of sulfuric acid, and he intentionally burned his own hand completely down to the bone.
We really need to linger on the medical reality of that choice for a second. Sulfuric acid doesn't just singe the skin.
No, it's a terrifying chemical.
It causes a severe, deep tissue chemical burn that continues to eat through flesh until it is chemically neutralized. The agonizing pain of holding your hand out and allowing a corrosive chemical to literally melt your skin to the bone is just almost unimaginable.
It totally strips away any illusion that this story is just some clever little trick.
Right, it's not a prank.
No, it grounds the entire deep dive in stark physical horror. He had to permanently maim himself just to buy 24 hours of unsupervised time.
It's the ultimate physical manifestation of his internal resolve. The factory overseers needed absolute proof of incapacity, and he gave it to them.
He destroyed a piece of his own body to save the rest of it.
Beautifully put. So his hand is heavily bandaged, he is officially excused from work, and the window of opportunity finally opens.
Okay, so it's March 23rd, 1849. The plan officially goes into motion.
The clock starts.
A carpenter they had hired builds the box out of rough hickory wood. We mentioned the dimensions earlier, but just to reiterate, 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2.5 feet deep.
So small.
They line the inside with baize, which is a coarse woolen cloth, just to provide at least a tiny bit of cushioning against the rough wood. And then Brown climbs inside.
He also brings a few survival items. He has a small bladder of water and just a few biscuits.
I should note, actually, that the historical sources conflict slightly on some of the carpentry details here. Like, the 1849 narrative mentions a single air hole bored into the wood, while the 1851 edition suggests there were maybe up to 3 small holes.
Yeah, that discrepancy is pretty common with these types of narratives.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, these narratives were partially ghostwritten by abolitionist editors, which was a very common practice of the era, to tailor the text for different audiences. And that often leads to slight narrative drift over time.
Ah, I see.
But honestly, whether it was 1 hole or 3, the fundamental mechanics remain completely terrifying. A grown man is sealed inside a dark, nearly airtight cube, entirely dependent on a few fractions of an inch of open space to keep from asphyxiating.
And on the outside of this hickory crate, they stencil the words dry goods, and crucially, they paint a very clear warning, this side up with care.
Which is incredibly optimistic of them.
Totally. So Samuel Smith nails the lid down. He binds the box with 5 sturdy hickory hoops to ensure it doesn't pop open in transit. And from that second on, Henry Brown is entirely blind, completely immobilized, and at the absolute mercy of the 19th century freight system.
And that journey from Richmond to Philadelphia took roughly 27 hours. We really have to break down the logistics of that transit because it wasn't just a single smooth train ride.
Right. It was an incredibly chaotic route.
The box was transferred through at least 8 separate conveyances. It was loaded onto a horse-drawn wagon in Richmond, hauled over these bumpy cobblestone streets to a train depot.
Okay.
Then it was loaded into a baggage car on the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. It went by train to the Potomac River, where it was transferred onto a steamboat heading to Washington, D.C.
Oh my God, the constant moving.
But it doesn't stop. From there, another wagon, another train to Baltimore, a ferry across the river, and finally one last train to Philadelphia.
So 8 different times he's being violently picked up, thrown down, and manhandled by freight workers. And despite that really prominent this side up warning painted right on the wood, the handlers completely ignored it, didn't they?
They completely ignored it. They treated it exactly like a crate of dry goods. They just tumbled it end over end.
I mean, the physical toll on a human body in that scenario has to be extreme.
It's beyond extreme. For a significant portion of the steamboat journey, the box was actually placed upside down. Brown was literally balanced on his head and his shoulders in the pitch black.
Oh, that is awful.
The blood pooled in his skull. In his later writings, he described the veins in his temples swelling, feeling like his eyes were going to physically burst from their sockets.
And he's stuck like that for hours.
The pressure was so intense, it was causing him to drift in and out of consciousness.
I really want you, the listener, to sit with that specific image for a second. Your hand is throbbing from a chemical burn to the bone. You are folded entirely in half. You're upside down. The air is stale, it's hot, and it's running out.
And your brain is just swelling with blood pressure.
Exactly. And the craziest part is you hear people walking around right outside the wood. If you just tap on the wood, if you just groan, they will open it and the pain will immediately stop.
But if he groaned, if a handler heard a human voice emanating from a crate of dry goods, They would pry it open out of curiosity or fear.
Right.
And the moment that lid came off, Henry Brown would be sent straight back to slavery.
Mm.
The institution of slavery had spent his entire life demanding his silence, right?
Mhm.
Demanding his absolute compliance.
Right. Exactly.
But inside that box, he took that forced silence and turned it into his absolute only weapon. He wrote that he resolved internally to conquer or die.
It is the ultimate test of endurance. He is dying in the dark, and he knows that asking for help is literally a fate worse than death.
It is.
But in the midst of this complete torture, the historical record provides this incredible, almost cinematic intervention of pure luck.
Oh, this part is amazing.
Brown is upside down on the deck of the steamboat. His head is pounding. He's mere minutes from likely dying of a stroke or an aneurysm. And two tired freight handlers just walk over, grab the box, and flip it right side up.
And they don't flip it because they suddenly notice the warning label, right?
No, they flip it because they are tired, and the dimensions of the box make it a perfect place to sit.
It's unbelievable.
Two men casually sit on top of Henry Brown to rest their feet, completely oblivious to the fact that their desire for a makeshift chair just saved the life of the man suffocating beneath them.
The absolute indifference of the universe just working in his favor for once.
Yeah. And finally, after 27 hours, the long, terrifying nightmare ends. The rumbling of the Philadelphia train stops. The box is offloaded onto a final wagon and driven through the streets. It is now the morning of March 24th, 1849.
And the wagon pulls up to the office of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society.
All right.
Inside that office, James Miller McKim, William Still, and a few other members of the Vigilance Committee are waiting. The box is carried in and set on the floor. The door is locked.
The tension in that room must have been so thick you could cut it with a knife.
Oh, absolutely. You have to imagine it. The committee members are just staring at this rough hickory crate. They know the transit time. They know how brutal the journey is.
Yeah, they have to be terrified.
They are entirely unsure if they are about to open a package containing a free man or a coffin containing a corpse.
Someone steps forward and knocks tentatively on the wood, and a voice from inside answers.
Just an incredible moment.
They grab a crowbar, and the metal bites into the hickory. The nails screech as the lid is pried up and thrown back. Henry Brown, drenched in sweat, his hand burned, his muscles totally crammed after 27 hours, rises up from the box.
Such a powerful image.
He looks at the men staring at him in shock, reaches out a hand and says, "How do you do, gentlemen?"
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Mhm.
the understatement of that specific greeting is just breathtaking. It is the profound, emotional summit of the entire deep dive.
It's so polite.
Right. He is quite literally rising from a tomb. After surviving a grueling, dehumanizing ordeal where the entire world treated him as literal cargo, the very first thing he does is reclaim his humanity with the most civilized, polite greeting imaginable.
Yeah, he re-enters the world not as freight, but as a gentleman.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? He didn't scream. He didn't collapse in a weeping heap. He maintained absolute composure. And then, according to the sources, he immediately began to sing.
He had a song prepared.
He did. He had selected a specific psalm to sing the moment he was free, his own adaptation of Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he heard my calling.
It's beautiful.
Of everything he could have done, he chose gratitude and song. That might just be the bravest hello in recorded history.
It is a triumphant, deeply moving moment of resurrection. I mean,
Right.
William Still wrote about it in his ledgers with absolute awe.
I bet.
But, a resurrection that dramatic is incredibly loud. You cannot keep a story like that a secret. And the noise of Henry Brown's triumph very quickly generated a devastating consequence.
Right, because he became instantly famous.
Oh, an overnight sensation.
The abolitionist press got a hold of the story, and he became known across the country as Henry Box Brown. And he really leaned into the public eye, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely did.
He became a celebrated speaker on the abolitionist circuit, and he didn't just give speeches, he toured with a massive contraption called a moving panorama. Can you explain what that actually was mechanically?
Yeah, a moving panorama was essentially the 19th century equivalent of an IMAX documentary.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
It was an enormous, continuous scroll of painted canvas, sometimes literally hundreds of feet long, mounted on two massive vertical spools.
Wow, that's huge.
As Brown spoke on stage, unseen stagehands would turn these giant cranks, rolling the canvas from one spool to the other right behind him. The canvas was painted with scenes depicting the horrors of slavery, the auction blocks, the chain gangs, the brutal reality he had lived.
That sounds incredibly immersive.
It was. With dramatic limelight illuminating the canvas, it was a deeply theatrical experience for the audience. He called it the mirror of slavery.
It was brilliant advocacy, really, but it sparked severe backlash from within the abolitionist community, most notably from Frederick Douglass.
Yes, Douglass was not happy.
Douglass, who had also escaped slavery himself, was absolutely furious that Brown and the Vigilance Committee had publicized the exact method of his escape.
And you can understand why. Frederick Douglass was looking at the Underground Railroad from an operational security standpoint.
Right? Secrecy was everything.
The entire network relied on absolute secrecy. By publishing the fact that Adams Express was unwittingly shipping escaped people and detailing the exact dimensions and labeling of the box, Brown was burning a bridge.
He was giving away the playbook.
Exactly. Douglass argued that keeping the method a secret could have allowed dozens, maybe even hundreds of other people to utilize the exact same loophole.
And the tragedy is, Douglass's warning wasn't just theoretical. He was proven right almost immediately.
Sadly, yes.
The sources detail that just weeks after Brown's escape, Samuel Smith, the white shoemaker in Richmond who had mailed the box, got greedy.
He pushed his luck.
He tried to use the exact same method to ship 2 more enslaved men north, but because the story was in every single newspaper, the shipping authorities were on super high alert.
The shipment was intercepted. The box was opened right there in the depot. The men inside were captured and sent back into slavery, and Samuel Smith was arrested.
And he went to prison. Right.
He was convicted and sent to the state penitentiary for over 7 years. The escape hatch was slammed permanently shut.
Wow.
It really is the central paradox of our deep dive here. The very narrative that made Henry Box Brown immortal, the story that gave him a huge platform to fight the institution of slavery, was the exact same thing that destroyed the route for anyone else.
I mean, I understand the operational logic of Frederick Douglass's criticism. I really do.
Yeah.
But I push back against the moral judgment of it.
It's a tough balance.
Can we truly blame Henry Brown for screaming his victory from the rooftops? When you have survived the unsurvivable, when a system has stripped you of your voice and treated you like an animal your entire life, expecting you to just keep quiet about your ultimate triumph is an enormous ask.
It's a huge burden.
Is it really fair to demand that a traumatized survivor hide their own victory, their own reclaimed identity, for the sake of a collective movement?
It's a profoundly difficult ethical tension. Because Douglass was fighting a systemic war, right? But Brown was fighting to reclaim his own individual existence.
Exactly.
To ask Brown to stay quiet, to hide the incredible subversion of what he had accomplished, is demanding a massive psychological toll from a man who had already paid everything.
He really had.
But the reality of his newfound fame was that it made him highly visible. And in 1850, visibility for a fugitive slave became a literal death sentence.
Because of the new laws.
Right. The United States Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This legislation essentially federalized slave catching.
Which is just terrifying.
It deputized ordinary citizens in the North, legally requiring them to assist in the capture of escaped slaves under threat of severe fines and imprisonment. It destroyed the entire concept of a free state.
So nowhere was safe.
Nowhere. Slave catchers were suddenly roaming the streets of Philadelphia and Boston with federal warrants.
The law stripped away any semblance of safety. And Henry Box Brown, as literally one of the most famous fugitives in the country, was a prime target. He had a massive bounty on his head.
He had to get out.
He could not stay in the United States. So he was forced to pack up his panorama and flee across the Atlantic Ocean to England.
And this begins a massive 25-year chapter of his life that is so often reduced to just a footnote in history books.
Right, they treat it like an epilogue.
But he doesn't just go to England and lives quietly. He spends the quarter of a century touring the British Isles. And he evolves. He doesn't just stay an abolitionist speaker reciting his trauma. He completely reinvents himself as a Victorian showman.
He becomes a mesmerist and a magician, doesn't he?
He does. Mesmerism was a massive craze in Victorian England. It was this combination of hypnotism, animal magnetism, and theatrical psychology.
Oh, interesting.
Practitioners claimed to be able to induce trance states and heal ailments. And Brown realized that the British public's appetite for straightforward abolitionist lectures was sort of waning. So he pivoted.
Smart guy.
Very. He incorporated mesmerism into his shows. He learned stage magic. He leaned heavily into the theatricality of his own survival, even stepping into a replica of the box on stage and having audience members examine it.
Wow, he really turned it into a spectacle.
He became an incredibly successful entertainer.
He also built a new personal life over there. He met a white British woman, they married, and they started a brand new family in England.
And this is where the history gets incredibly messy.
Yeah, and where the criticism against him from his contemporaries back then and from modern historians gets really
It
intense.
does.
Because despite earning considerable money from his speaking tours and his magic shows over those decades, Henry Brown did not use his wealth to buy the freedom of his first wife, Nancy, and their children, who were still enslaved back in North Carolina.
And this raises a vital question about how we interact with historical figures. We have a deeply ingrained desire for our heroes to be perfect saints.
Right, we want them to be flawless.
We want their narratives to be morally flawless parables of righteousness. And when a figure acts in a way that is human, flawed, or seemingly selfish, we just don't quite know what to do with them.
We get uncomfortable.
Exactly. The backlash against Brown from American abolitionists was severe. They felt he had abandoned his family to play the showman in London.
But, I mean, why do we constantly demand that victims of historical atrocities act with perfect moral clarity? Surviving trauma doesn't magically turn you into a saint.
No, of course not.
It often results in messy, complicated, heavily compartmentalized lives. I mean, let's look at the actual logistics of what buying them would have required. How does a black fugitive in London safely negotiate a purchase price with a hostile white slaveholder in North Carolina in the 1850s?
The logistical hurdles were monumental. He would have had to trust intermediaries, wire massive sums of money without any real guarantees, and basically rely on the goodwill of the very people who had destroyed his life in the first place.
Which is an insane risk.
It is, but beyond the logistics, there is the psychological wall. We simply cannot cleanly judge the emotional calculations of a man who watched his world end on a street in Richmond.
That's a great point.
Perhaps the trauma of that loss was so absolute that his only mechanism for daily survival was to completely sever himself from the past and build a new reality where he actually had agency.
He had to compartmentalize to survive.
Exactly. Refusing to sanitize his history, acknowledging the controversial choices he made in England, it actually honors him as a complex, real human being rather than just a two-dimensional symbol.
He lived a full, messy, fascinating life entirely on his own terms. He eventually returned to the United States in 1875, long after the Civil War had destroyed the institution of slavery, and he performed his magic acts in America until his death in 1897.
A really long, full life.
When you look at the entirety of his arc, from the sweltering heat of the Richmond tobacco factory, to the suffocating darkness of the Hickory Crate, to the brightly lit magic stages of Victorian London, it is staggering.
It's an epic journey.
We started this deep dive talking about scale. And it is incredible to me how the scale of one single man's heartbeat, muffled inside a tiny wooden box, somehow managed to be louder than the massive institutional horror that was actively trying to erase him.
He took the very mechanism designed to strip him of his humanity and used it as his vehicle for liberation. He forced the world to recognize him as a man by briefly, agonizingly, pretending to be an object.
It's such a wild subversion.
It's a legacy of unimaginable endurance and brilliant subversion.
Slavery looked at him and said he was a thing. Cargo, property, freight. So he became freight. He became exactly what they insisted he was, and he mailed that thing to freedom, where the box was open and the thing stood up, politely said hello, and turned back into a man.
Beautifully said.
He spent 27 hours in a box the size of a coffin, so that the rest of his existence would not be defined by one.
It is a story that really demands we reckon with the terrifying cost of breaking free from the margins and the incredible resilience of the human mind.
And it leaves you with a final thought to mull over as we finish up today. Think about the boxes of societal expectation, of moral purity, and of historical memory that we still put people in today.
Oh, that's a great question.
When someone manages to break out of the box that the world has assigned to them, do we actually celebrate their messy, complicated, entirely human freedom? Or do we, like the critics of Henry Box Brown, just immediately try to build them a new, more comfortable box of our own expectations?
Something to really think about.
Thank you for exploring the intimate echoes of the past with us today on this deep dive. And remember, the next time you are told to look at the grand, sweeping narrative of history, don't forget to look down for the wooden crates.